Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 1 of the Keto Project. So I realized that I should probably take this opportunity to kind of introduce myself again to people who might be new to this channel or new to this Keto Project. So my name is Lauren. I live with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. I've struggled with my mental health since I was about 18 or 19. I'm now 32 years old, and I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder at 25 years old. So I've been living with it for a while, learning throughout the last several years how to manage it better, and kind of sharing with you all what I've learned through this YouTube channel. If you want to hear more about my story, you can watch this video here, which goes into detail about my experience living with schizoaffective disorder. Okay, so we kind of kicked off the Keto Project this week. And again, just a brief overview of what we're doing with this Keto Project is we are going to be attempting to treat or manage my schizoaffective disorder using different metabolic therapies, the primary one being the ketogenic diet. Also looking at other metabolic therapies that include things like exercise, sleep, looking at reducing or completely eliminating alcohol and drug consumption, social engagement, and other things like that that contribute to metabolic health. So throughout this first week, I started meeting with she's kind of a mental health coach. She's a therapist, but also a nutritionist. And she just brings this wonderful wealth of information and knowledge about how to incorporate keto from a therapeutic lens, I guess, to people who are living with mental illness and how to use it for that means. Her name is Nicole Laurent. She has a website, which is really great. I believe it's mentalhealthketo.com, but I will provide a link to that in the description below if you want to check out more from her. But I started meeting with her, and she did kind of a series of intake processes or forms or whatnot that I had to fill out. And it went through a lot of in-depth information about my history with my mental illness, my history with food, my history with my experience of my mood and symptoms and whatnot. And it even did a cognitive assessment test to kind of gauge where I'm at cognitively right now to hopefully probably retest again down the line to see if keto or these metabolic therapies have any effect on my cognitive functioning as well. So she's kind of just been talking me through the beginning of this process of entering the ketogenic diet and getting into ketosis, which is essentially when your body switches from burning carbohydrates and using carbohydrates for energy to using ketones and burning fat, I guess, to use for energy. So this first week has really been dedicated to getting used to tracking my food through an app that I'm using called Chronometer. I'll link to that in the description below as well if that's something that you want to check out. But basically this app allows me to weigh and measure all of my food so that I get all of the macros, which just basically means the breakdown of protein, carbs, and fat, as well as nutrients that are included in the foods and whatnot. And it just gives me a really amazing summary of all of that nutritional information. So this first week, I'm just kind of getting used to tracking what I typically eat through that app, not really making any changes or anything, just logging what I typically eat. And this will kind of help us also to see how many carbs I typically consume on average, and will kind of allow us to figure out how to gradually reduce that, working toward the goal of getting into ketosis and having very minimal carbs. So I'm meeting with Nicole twice a week, and we're recording all of our sessions. So if there's ever anything that I feel would be beneficial to share with you, our audience, we will definitely be including bits and pieces of those sessions as well. So this first week and kind of the beginning of this Keto Project is also a good time to kind of figure out what my baseline is. And what I mean by this is, what is my experience currently of my symptoms, whether it's my psychotic symptoms, my mood symptoms, my experience of my illness right now before implementing keto and metabolic therapies, as well as kind of what's my baseline around what I typically eat, so nutrition, what I typically do for exercise, what my sleep schedule typically looks like, and just kind of getting a good idea of where I'm starting from. So in terms of symptoms, I share a lot on this channel about what my experience of my symptoms is, and we kind of have a good idea of what my baseline is, but just kind of a brief synopsis of what my experience is like. Generally, my positive symptoms, so my hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, is fairly well managed while I'm taking medication, which I currently am. I usually don't get a lot of that. I do still experience breakthrough symptoms with that, where I'll experience hallucinations still, but they're not really very distressing very often for me when I'm on medication and it's being managed. Usually it will be voices that I'll hear, not really distressing, again, more like idle chit chat in the back of my consciousness, usually commentary about things that are going on around me or just kind of nonsense chatter. Sometimes I will experience kind of perception hallucinations, so the visual side of hallucinations. But again, not a lot and not super distressing. I do still experience feelings of paranoia and anxiety, and that maybe is actually something that I'm going through a little bit more intensely than usual right now. I think stemming from what I recently shared about with my bout of anxiety that I was experiencing. I think it's kind of making the paranoia aspect a little bit worse as well. But that's kind of where I'm at in terms of positive symptoms. I think the symptoms that I struggle with more kind of on a daily basis and on a functioning level is the more subtle negative and cognitive symptoms of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. So things like difficulty with motivation, difficulty with emotional expression, difficulty with blunting of emotions or affect, things like scattered thoughts or not being able to maintain a train of thought or scattered thinking or that sort of thing are definitely the things that I struggle with a little bit more, and the things that maybe are a little bit harder to really put a finger on and identify are probably the things that I struggle with the most, and probably what I'm hoping the most will be affected by using this ketogenic diet and by these metabolic therapies. I hope that it will improve those aspects of my illness that haven't really been able to improve through medication. In terms of where I'm at lifestyle-wise, I'm getting a good idea of where my nutrition is at through tracking this week, and I'll share probably more about where I'm at once I get kind of an average of the week. In terms of exercise, I exercise quite regularly, so that is kind of a metabolic intervention that I already engage in. I do a lot of running, and I usually run 4 to 5 or 6 times a week. So I definitely do a lot of that. I do try to do other things as well, such as cycling or swimming, or hopefully we'll get back into going to the gym. I canceled my membership a few months back, but I think I'm going to start that up again. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at exercise-wise. Sleep-wise is something that I do struggle with a little bit. I recognize that I am a person who needs more sleep, and sleep also contributes a great deal to maintaining wellness pertaining to my mental illness, but it is something that I struggle a little bit with, and we will definitely get more into that in subsequent videos. But I don't really have a regular set bedtime, which is something that I think I need and would help me in terms of implementing better sleep strategies moving forward. Getting up, I usually get up anywhere between 7 to 8, mostly because of kids getting up and those sorts of responsibilities. And so I do have more of a set wake up time, but yeah, the bedtime is something that I need to work on and is not something that I currently have a lot of structure around. For other lifestyle factors, I guess drug and alcohol use. I don't really use a lot of drugs. I have videos on this channel about dabbling with things like marijuana or even mushrooms, but that's not something that I do on a regular basis. It's more probably alcohol consumption that would be more of a regular thing. Usually probably it's very much socially more so, but usually 1 to 2 times a week. And that's something that's, I think, been interesting to think more about getting into this project is my relationship with alcohol. So as part of this baseline week, I am kind of trying to savor my last experiences of whatever, and having a beer is one of those because that's just not something that... Thank you.
A couple of vegan Sammys for you. Anything else I can get you?
No, that's great. Thank you. Because that's just not something I'm going to be able to have at all moving forward. And so, I think that this is probably one that is going to be kind of easy to give up because I know it's not good for me. Every time I drink alcohol, it doesn't feel good for me mental health-wise the next day or later on or whatever it may be for several days sometimes. And so I know it's not good for me, but going through this process of knowing exactly why it's not good for me and how it affects my metabolic health, I think will also just help me realize that it's not something I need anymore. But that said, I'm out enjoying my very last one, and so cheers. A big carb-heavy sandwich doesn't hurt either. How's your last banh mi experience tasting?
This would be a great last meal.
I mentioned that I know that it's bad for me to drink alcohol, and so I think it's probably important to explain a little bit more about why I still do it, even though I know it's bad for me, because I think it's probably something that a lot of other people can relate to as well. I think that there's an element of self-medicating with it. It helps with my symptoms. It helps me to feel better in the moment. And I guess also just the universal mind-altering substances feel good when they're going on. And so I think that it is something that is difficult for a lot of people to give up. But I hope that through this project, we'll be able to kind of show how it might not be necessary in terms of immediate relief, and how following more lifestyle changes can help with that relief of symptoms as well, or even better than coping mechanisms such as alcohol. So something that we didn't actually talk about on the channel while we were doing it was that we have actually tried the ketogenic diet before. Back in 2020, I believe it was, we read a bit about how the ketogenic diet can be a means of therapeutic intervention for mental illnesses like schizoaffective disorder. And so Rob and I thought, hey, let's give it a try. I think, we didn't have as much information as we do now about what exactly it takes and why it's beneficial. And it's really more that metabolic health component, which makes it an effective treatment. But we kind of just thought, well, if we just try the ketogenic diet and that's it, cut our carbs down to 20 grams a day, maybe it'll work. And so that's what we did. But we really didn't do a good job of really thinking about it as broader metabolic health. So we were still doing things like drinking wine regularly and just factoring the carbs from those wine into our daily carb intake. And so that was not good in and of itself. We weren't doing things like looking at exercise and sleep and all the other different types of metabolic therapies that are kind of important to go hand in hand with the ketogenic diet. And we weren't really well informed about the ketogenic diet either. So we were consuming a lot of sugar alcohols, which we didn't count into our daily carb intake. And I'm not sure, hopefully we'll learn more from experts throughout this about what the balance with those is and if those are actually okay and whatnot. But there was just a lot of things that we probably didn't do right the first time. And then, we were on it for a couple months, and then the pandemic hit and it just became a bit too stressful. I didn't really feel like I was having benefits. And so we decided to stop it after 2 or 3 months. Again, I don't think we really did a good job of approaching it in a way that was probably necessary to set us up for success with it. But it did have different effects on my health. I noticed my skin was way better. I had very, very little bloating and felt really good in that regard. I do remember feeling quite tired, but again, that probably had a bit to do with just not really doing the diet properly and still consuming things like alcohol and a lot of sugar alcohols. I think I had better mental clarity. So that was perhaps an early sign that it was affecting my mental health in a positive way. But again, we didn't really give it enough of a chance beyond that 2 to 3 month mark to really see if it would have any lasting benefits on my mental health. Something that is interesting to note is that I also live with PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome, which really affects my hormones. And I don't typically get my period as a result of my PCOS, or it's really, really irregular. But when I started keto, I was like clockwork regular with my period. And I guess it had a really big impact on balancing out my hormones in my body. And I actually thought that getting pregnant was going to be really, really difficult because of my PCOS. It is a really difficult thing for a lot of people who are living with PCOS. But literally months after we were on keto, I got pregnant with Teddy. So it had some effect on my health, be it physical or mental. And so I'm really excited, I guess, to do it in a better way this time, do it more thoroughly in terms of including other metabolic therapies and doing proper medical keto in terms of perhaps less or no alcohol and less sugar alcohols and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of having some experience using the ketogenic diet before, but I think I'm just feeling a lot of excitement at the potential that this has to really impact my life. And I think it's probably important to also share with you that I am coming at this with a degree of skepticism too. I think kind of trying to balance the skepticism of, an intervention like this working as effectively as many claim for a psychiatric illness. It seems difficult for me to understand because, I've very much gone through this medical model of being told that medications are primarily what is needed to manage my mental illness, my schizoaffective disorder. And so to kind of wrap my head around an idea of more lifestyle kind of changes and nutrition changes impacting my mental illness and, managing it in a similar or even better way is hard for me to comprehend without really, I guess, experiencing it firsthand. And so that's what I'm kind of trying to do, is go through it firsthand and hopefully be able to show you all throughout the process what it's like and what effect it has on me. I think when I think about the interventions that we're going to be working on over the next 6 months or so, around eating well, getting exercise, getting proper sleep, and really figuring out a routine around that, interventions like these and cutting out alcohol and things like that it's hard to think that, it's hard to feel that those won't have a positive impact on anyone who does them, regardless of if you have a mental illness or not. Those are just kind of healthy changes that really would benefit anyone. I think that's perhaps where some of the optimism is coming from, just that I know my life is going to improve by making these changes and by building more routine into taking care of myself and maintaining wellness. And I guess if it also is able to manage my experience of my mental illness better, that's an amazing bonus too. When I was having one of my sessions with Nicole this past week, she mentioned that methylfolate in vitamins was actually seen as a therapeutic intervention for mental illness. And it's just stuff like that, and diving deeper into, hearing about how these more holistic, I guess, nutrition or metabolic therapy interventions have been for other people, and how we're learning a lot more about how effective these can be. It creates a little bit of, I guess, anger within me, where I get a little bit frustrated and angry that throughout my whole experience of navigating my mental illness, no interventions like this have ever been discussed with me. It really has just been a huge, huge focus on medications or things like ECT. And those are kind of the main interventions that I've had throughout the course of navigating my mental illness with the medical care system. And from, a perspective of looking at how big the mental health care system is and how many people they need to serve and meet the needs of, I get a little bit, to a degree, why, a more complicated approach, like looking at all these holistic elements of a person's lifestyle and, way of living and nutrition, and trying to implement a bit of a difficult thing like a ketogenic diet, I can see why that is not the commonplace approach, and why it's a lot easier to just prescribe a pill and have the patient take the pill. But if this is, an effective means of treating mental illness, and perhaps even the root cause of mental illness being metabolic dysfunction or metabolic disorder, then it doesn't make sense to me why we're not focusing all of our attention on these types of interventions. So yeah, throughout this process, it is my hope to get a better understanding of how these interventions can affect someone who's living with mental illness, how difficult it is to implement, what it looks like to implement, and sharing that with you all throughout the journey, and hopefully coming to some sort of conclusion in the end as to whether or not it's effective for me and potentially for others as well. And who knows, perhaps this is the start of a larger shift in the way the medical system approaches mental illness as well. So that's kind of where things are at this first week of starting out on this keto project. I really appreciate everyone who's been so supportive in the comments. And for those of you who are voicing concerns about this project, or concerns about using keto as a therapeutic intervention, I hear you that there's valid skepticisms. There's also some misinformation about what exactly it is and how exactly it affects the brain and the body. And so I'm really hoping that throughout this project, we'll be able to provide a lot more information that will hopefully clear a lot of that up, and also just hopefully create more transparency around what this intervention can look like and its potential effects on someone who's living with a serious mental illness such as schizoaffective disorder. So thank you again for following along, and we will see you in the next video. Wishing you and your loved ones good health. Bye.